What is up, YouTube? Thank you for joining us on PBD Live this week. Hope everybody's having a great week. We're having some awesome weather here in South Florida, although I haven't been taking advantage of it. Haven't been using my truck or anything cool. I mean, I use it every day, but I haven't floored it in a while. Not since I tried that draggy out on the street out front and felt like I was going to die. I've been taking it a little easy since then. So how is everybody doing this evening? We got Nitrous and Bias Pie in the house. He's asking a question already about troubleshooting. We'll go over that in a little bit. About data logs. That's a very good question, though, and we will bring that up a little bit later. Here to find out what's up. All right, guys. What I'm going to do today is we're going to talk about troubleshooting and, common mistakes we see and really, I don't want to throw shade at anybody, and we're not going to talk about anybody in particular, but just general lack of effort, I guess, in people trying to learn about their cars and also learning troubleshooting. And the key part to troubleshooting is, at its root, it's very basic. Okay. Now, as you continue to go down the rabbit hole of an issue, it may get too complicated for you to figure out. But troubleshooting in general is fairly basic and it's logic based. And if you follow some basic steps in how to go about it, it can get a little bit easier. And we're going to go over some common issues I've seen. We're going to go over how to troubleshoot issues with fuel systems, issues with boost, supercharger, turbocharger. And of course, if you guys have any questions out there on troubleshooting certain things, we'll go over that as well. But before we get to that, let's say hi to everybody else. Hey, Brandy's here. She has to be here. She's married to me. What's up, David? How's it going? This no track down here is awful. Absolutely. And I'm not, I don't know how to say this. It's obviously not as bad as somebody dying, but it kind of feels that way because at first, it sucked, but it was new. And the longer it drags on with no track down here, it really, really sucks. What's up, Jeremy Mendoza, or Ed? What's up? Mendoza's Coyotes here. Michael Ramirez, Optimum Performance, Chris M. What's up? Thanks to everybody for joining us. Before we get into the troubleshooting thing, I wanted to share something that I shared on Facebook today, and it really blew up our website. Tons of comments. I haven't even gotten to all the comments. People started arguing, and I just stopped looking at them. But it's a good topic, and it's something cool. It's a tool I've used for years and years and years. I almost kept this as like my nice little secret. And it is on our website now, but there's no easy link to it. But you can get to it by going to pbdyno.com/timeslip. I'll have some links to get to it easier eventually, along with some other calculators and things I use for performance. I wanted to wrap all this up into an app for a phone. And I started down that path, but I got too busy with it. So we'll just put most of that stuff up on the website. I think it'll work for most people. Most people's phones get to the website anyway, so I guess we don't really need an app. Anyway, what I'm talking about is a time slip completion tool that I use for all sorts of things. I'll show you how it works. So first off, let's look at this time slip. I'm not sure what this time slip is. Whoops. Let's do this real quick. Make this easier. Crap. That's not going to work. So we'll do that, and we'll do that. All right. Hopefully you guys can see that. I think you can. So the point of this slip is let's say, at the very basic, let's say a time is missing on your time slip. So with this, you just put two different incrementals in. So we'll put the 330 in. You can go all the way down to the third digit if you want. You don't have to, but we will. So as you can see on the left, let's see if I can make this bigger. Hopefully that's big enough for you guys to see. Oh, wait, you know what? I think I can do. Yeah, there we go. That's better. Okay, so I put in the 330 and the 1/8 mile over here where it's green, and that's the input, but you should only put 2 times in there. And then you hit calculate. And then it will show you your calculated time and trap speed and everything. So as you can see with the 330, it went back and estimated it went a 134 when in reality it went a 130. And then it said it went a 835 at 171. So it's shows it a little quicker, shows it a little slower on the 60 foot and a little quicker on the quarter mile. But as you can see, this is very, very useful. One great reason to use this unit is, even though in the time slip it didn't go 166, let's just use the calculator numbers, 171. So now what you can do is get rid of the 330 and go, hey, I want to know what I would go with a 120 60 foot. So you hit calculate. Now, obviously, a 120 60 foot with the same eighth mile is only going to show 154. So then you have to lower your eighth mile to get back to that same number. Pretty close, 170.8. So with a 120 60 foot, you're going to improve from a 545 to a 515 and go from an 840 to an 804. So that's one really, really good use of this, and that's why I use it a lot. It will also tell you, let's use a different slip here. And it's going to vary based on how well the car is working down the track. A couple people in all the comments said things like, what about cars that back half better? What about cars that don't back half as good? Obviously, this calculator can't account for everything, but you can, as long as you know how it works, you can use it that way. So this slip here is actually my best ET from my red car. So if you go down low and you do 120 and 324, it says it should have went a 758 at 187, yet I only went 766 at 174. Well, if you're just pulling this time slip out of your butt and trying this calculator, you're going to say, well, it didn't work. But there's something really important. At the time I ran this, I'm not sure if it was my converter or the engine or something was just killing the car in the back half, just killing it. So it would eighth mile great, and then it felt lazy as hell out the back. So based on how my car eighth miled, I could use this to say, if there was nothing wrong, this is probably what it would have ran. And it's probably fairly accurate, especially the ET. The 187, again, I might tweak this calculator a little bit to adjust quarter mile trap speeds, because it's always a little bit high and it gets worse the faster car you use. But the car did go 790 at 182 back when everything was super healthy. And then this was like, towards the engine was on its deathbed. I'm not sure if something was up with the converter or whatever. So, this says I should have went, 8 tenths quicker, or 800ths quicker, which is a big difference. So it's not exactly right, but this allows me to play and say, okay, if the engine was healthy, would have went a 758, but it only went a 120 60. So then let me see what it would do if I had a 115. We'll just use 187 as the baseline again. In this case, that's too fast. So 188, let's go up one more. There you go, 187. So on that same pass, if the engine was healthy and everything was good and I went a 115, it probably would have went a 749 or 747. So that's a real good use of this. And of course, for you draggy people, I did add in there here, it will tell you your 60 to 130 time based on your time slip, your 100 to 150, 0 to 60, 0 to 100. Tells you G-force at 60 mile an hour, and also your quarter mile to eighth mile ratio, which typically is fairly consistent, but that's going to change quite a bit based on the combination, like a nitrous car versus a turbo car. So anyway, I thought you guys might enjoy that, so I wanted to share that real quick before we get into the troubleshooting deal. But we'll go ahead and look at some comments here, and then, hold on, whoops, I didn't mean to click on that. Why isn't this working? Luke Walker, troubleshooting is architecture specific. One size doesn't fit all. Yes and no. Yes and no. It depends on what you're troubleshooting. The main issue I see is a lack of logic. People being able to look at things logically. I can troubleshoot things that I know nothing about to a certain point, obviously. But if you can use logic and understand the basics of how the system works, it's usually a lot easier to find the issue. The Sauce, hey, Ken, glad to be here. What's up? Craig Bill, can you start over? Nope, you didn't really miss anything except for the introduction that I had on the, whoops, hopefully everything's working, guys. Having a little issue here. It's telling me my stream is a little slow, so hopefully you guys can hear everything I'm saying. And maybe not. Anyway, we'll keep going. Hopefully everybody can hear what I'm saying. My comments aren't working either, unfortunately. So we'll keep going. So the main issue that I see in troubleshooting is people don't even make an attempt at it half the time. Most of you guys know that we're remote tuners. So we deal with a lot of people that work on their own cars, have their buddies help them work on their cars. I mean, even professional shops that maybe are working on things that, they may not be qualified, right? I've dealt with a lot of shops, old school shops. The guy could probably outbuild an engine with me, can do a lot of things better than me, but he's totally in left field when it comes to newer cars. So, even though those people don't know the platform, being, an experienced mechanic, they should be better at troubleshooting. So let's start off with one of the most typical fuel system issues, or most typical issues is fuel system related. So, when people, I see all the time, I see this constantly where people say, oh, I had to put new injectors because my ID 1050s were done at 800 horsepower. Bullshit. That did not happen. Whoever told you to do that doesn't know what they're doing. There's some other issue that if you did change injectors and it got better, then you're just masking the problem. And, at the end of the day, you want to fix it. But chances are, if that's the way you fixed it, you're going to have other problems because something is not configured correctly. So when you're dealing with fuel system issues, you've got lots of moving parts, right? So you've got the fuel system itself, the fuel pumps, whether it has a regulator. So we'll start with, we'll talk about, we'll talk about stock fuel systems first, because there's one really important thing I want to bring up there. So with a stock fuel system, Mustang GT in particular, this doesn't apply to every Mustang or every car for that matter, but Mustang GTs, especially Coyotes, 11 and newer, they have had fuel filters built into the fuel hat since they were made. So now you've got a 2011 Mustang that's 13, 14 years old with technically the stock fuel filter. If it has a stock fuel hat, it has a stock fuel filter. So, and that fuel filter was designed to last the life of the vehicle, but only if it's making 400 horsepower. So, or 400-ish. So, as the car ages and you're putting E85 in there that messes with that filter, and you're adding power, then you put a blower on it and a booster pump and all these things, you can have all sorts of issues that are related to a fuel filter that most people don't even know is there. So as far as stock fuel system stuff, that's really all I want to touch on. The bigger issue is when people start building the vehicles, E85, return style fuel systems, things get much more complicated. So let's go over the basic components, right? Well, first off, let's just give a scenario. We're on the dyno, or you're logging your car or whatever, and all of a sudden it goes lean right in the middle of the pull. What's the issue? Well, sometimes you can tell with the data log, but sometimes you can't. On some vehicles, we can log fuel pressure. On other vehicles, we can't. So what you have to do as a responsible owner, or if you're not wanting to troubleshoot yourself, get somebody involved in the car that knows what they're doing. That's the number one issue. If you're asking for help on Facebook, that's a fail. Ask us before you ask people on Facebook. We have, our premium tuning support membership deal that you can pay a little extra for. It's a yearly deal, and you can call us. Hey, I don't know what I'm doing with my car. Can you help me out? That's why we're here. That's why you pay for that phone number. But if you don't want to do that, there has to be somebody in your circle of friends, or if not, then hire like a qualified mechanic or ship us the car. Any of those things. But fuel system problems are one of the biggest issues. And, so like your typical Mustang nowadays is running either a 2 or 3 pump fuel system. So first off, you have 3 pumps that have to get power applied to them correctly. That fuel hat itself has to be properly made. We use 4 and we use lethal also, but there's lots of, I had a guy hit me up the other day for help for, on 3, a fuel system. And I'm just like, no, if Chad sees this, hopefully he doesn't get mad at me. I have no problem with on 3, but every single post I've ever seen with an on 3 fuel system, the hat is messed up. And this guy had fuel pressure issues, which probably was a leaky hat. And this guy is buying the cheapest part he could, and then obviously has no ability to troubleshoot it himself because he's reaching out to me, and I obviously didn't sell him that fuel system. So, and I feel bad for people like that a little bit, but, either A, don't do something you can't afford by buying the cheaper version that for sure isn't going to work properly, or possibly most likely isn't going to work properly. Or if you want to buy cheaper parts, at least have some help, with troubleshooting, and you're definitely going to have troubleshooting problems. Or troubleshooting, you're going to have things to troubleshoot if you buy cheaper parts typically, right? Either they don't fit perfectly, or they don't work at all, or they malfunction shortly after you buy them. There's so many things. So on the fuel system thing, when you're running lean, there's could be fuel pressure, right? Are all your pumps getting power? Are your grounds good? If you have a Hobbs switch on your pump, is that working properly? And there's a lot of people that tell you, oh, you shouldn't be running a Hobbs switch. There's no reason to say that. I have no problem with Hobbs switches. Can they fail? Of course they can fail, but so can the fuel pump. So can fuses. So can all kinds of things. So there's really no problem with a Hobbs switch. But what I see is a lot of the times people instantly go to injector. So I want to, this is not up for debate, okay? It's just science. If you log the proper things, and sometimes you can't easily always log the proper things, like I said, fuel pressure, but one thing you can usually log fine is injector pulse width. So there's calculators online, but I figured I'd just make this for you guys to make it a little easier to understand. So I threw this spreadsheet together really fast. Let's see. How do I zoom in to this? I thought I knew how to do that. There we go. Oops. That's not the right thing. Shit. Now I hit it. I don't know how to unhide it. There we go. Exit full screen, view, zoom. So what we have here, and obviously you're hopefully not going to have a fuel system issue at low RPM, but I just did all RPMs. But once you get up into this range, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, this is the maximum pulse width the injector can possibly handle because of RPM. And one thing you have to realize is this isn't dependent on the injector. This is just math, right? You have an engine that you only have a certain window to fire that injector based on RPM. The higher the RPM, right? That's revolutions per minute. The less time you have to inject fuel. It's very simple. And you can log this with anything, I assume. I know you can log it with HP tuners. I would assume you can log it with SCT. I use this all the time. So, all right, I'm at 8,000 RPM and I'm seeing, well, first off, this is at 100% duty cycle, which you don't really want to run. So if you're getting anywhere near these numbers, you got to start considering, upgrading your injectors. So, all the way up at 9,000 RPM, you only have 13 milliseconds total to inject fuel. So when people go, okay, what what power is an ID 1050 good to? Well, do you have a 6,500 RPM engine, which would be, a pulse width up to 18 and a half? Or do you have a 9,000 RPM engine and now you only have a 13 millisecond window to inject your fuel? So that's the number one easiest way to determine if you have an injector that's, needs upsizing. A lot of people talk about duty cycle, which, this is part of a duty cycle calculation. So you would just have to do the math as far as percent. You would take this, which is 100% duty cycle, and then see what your actual pulse width is, and then you can do some math and come up with a percentage, or you can just look and see how close you are to that number. So when it comes to injector sizing, this is like super easy to log. There's no excuse for people to just throw injectors at a vehicle. The next problem you're going to have is fuel pressure. So on 18 and newer GT, GT350s, GT500, they all have fuel pressure sensors. Now, a lot of the times people are not using those totally in the tune, but they're still there and loggable. And this is very, very useful because if your injector is big enough, now let's back up. So what's going to happen is you have to remember most of the vehicles we're talking about are closed loop fueling. And, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds because I want to talk more theories here, but this particular topic, fueling, I am going to talk a little bit more detail on. So now let's say you're revving the engine out and you hit this maximum duty cycle, or maximum pulse width, and the car goes lean. Well, I just got done telling you that means you need a bigger injector, but that's not exactly true because you have to first verify you're maintaining your fuel pressure. With these vehicles being closed loop, what's going to happen is if you, let's say whatever injector you have and at 7,000 RPM, it should be at, 12 milliseconds. Well, if you have low fuel pressure, the short-term trims are going to add in more and more fuel. And what's going to happen? Pulse width is going to go up. So this number could be higher than it should be, but not because the injector is too small. It's because it's making up for low fuel pressure. So they really go hand in hand, and you can't really look at one without looking at the other. But on certain applications, it's a little more difficult to log fuel pressure. S550, S197, those vehicles don't have fuel pressure sensors. So it becomes a little bit more tricky, especially for the end user. On the dyno, we can put a fitting in, log fuel pressure, all that's good. We don't do that normally, but if we're troubleshooting, we can do that. So, the two main things you have to determine is, do you have proper fuel pressure? And if so, are you getting close to being out of injector? And one thing to mention, like I said, these numbers I gave you are 100% duty cycle. Once an injector gets near 100% duty cycle, the fueling gets somewhat erratic. So if you're below this number, but just barely below this number, it's still a very good idea to upgrade. You probably don't want to exceed much more than 85% duty cycle, all things considered, if you have, the ability to do that. So now we've determined, okay, the injectors should be big enough, so we're having a fuel pressure issue. Well, what could it be? Well, on a return style fuel system, there's a lot that still could be a problem. You've got fuel pressure regulator. Is the fuel pressure regulator seeing boost? Some people you can tune cars without vacuum reference on a regulator, but we don't really recommend it. We did that a lot in the S197 days to keep it simple, pre-rail stuff, boom, boom, make it work similar to stock. But for the most part, we want everything boost referenced on boost cars. So, if you put the boost line on and now it's not working, is there an issue with the regulator? So now all of a sudden you need to check your regulator, and that's easy to do. You can, there's multiple ways to do it. One issue that could be with a regulator is the diaphragm. So how do you check the diaphragm on a regulator? I'm not an engineer. You don't have to be. You just have to look at things logically. So how does a fuel pressure regulator work? Well, again, this could be a 5-hour lesson and we're not going that route, but with a fuel pressure regulator, it's got a diaphragm in there. So you're setting base fuel pressure. And just to be clear, when we tell you to set your base fuel pressure at a number, that means with no vacuum or boost. I've seen tons of people set it with the vacuum hooked up to it. That's not how it works. Your fuel pressure regulator is designed to maintain a consistent pressure drop across the injector, which means if you set your base pressure at 50, right, and there's no manifold vacuum or boost, it's at 50, right? But let's say you have 20 inches of vacuum, okay? How much is that in boost or, PSI? So if it's 20 inches of vacuum, you have roughly 10 pounds of negative boost, right? So that means the air is pulling with 10 PSI because of the vacuum. So if we have a 50 PSI base pressure, the pressure in the fuel rail is actually only 40, and then it's making up that other 10 PSI by pulling down, it's pulling the fuel out of the injector. So by hooking the vacuum line up to the regulator, that's telling the regulator, hey, I've got negative 10 PSI of boost, and then the regulator lowers the fuel pressure, and you'll see 40 on the regulator, but the pressure drop across the injector, delta P, is 50. The same holds true when you add positive boost on top of it. You've got your base pressure at 50, and then you put 10 PSI on top of it. So let's talk about the manifold first. So you've got your fuel injector, and you've got 50 PSI up here in the rail, but you've got 10 PSI of boost in the manifold. So now you have 10 PSI pushing against the fuel. So the fuel pressure has to overcome that 10 PSI of pressure that's in the manifold. And how does it do that? Well, you have a line hooked up to the regulator that raises the fuel pressure by 10 PSI, maintaining 50 PSI pressure drop across the injector. So testing a diaphragm and a regulator, obviously the easiest way, and if you have a huge hole in your regulator, all you got to do is have the car idle and disconnect the vacuum line. And if it doesn't, using the numbers I was using, if it doesn't go from 50 to low 40s, it doesn't move with the vacuum line, then you got a problem. That's a big problem, usually, if it's doing it at idle. But you could have like a really little tiny hole and it only does it under boost. So how do you do that? Well, this gets a little bit more difficult, but not crazy difficult. You could take an air compressor, turn the regulator way down to like 20 PSI, let the car idle, and then just put the 20 PSI to the regulator. And if you have base 50, it should jump up to 70. Now, when you're dealing with an air compressor and air, it's never going to be exact. But if it moves roughly 20, then you know it's not the regulator. You obviously have to make sure, and testing things at idle works, but not for the whole entire system. Because let's say you have a 3-pump system, you got 2 pumps on and the third one comes on with a Hobb switch. Well, if the third pump is messed up, you're never going to know until you're at watt, right? So at some point in this whole conversation, you're only going to be able to test so much at idle. And that's when having, a way to log fuel pressure, which shouldn't be, but is way beyond what most people get into, because you don't have to and still have a successful car. And I guess that really ties into everything I'm talking about here, which is, even though this stuff seems simple, it's not, right? The successful people you see out there have had all of these issues I'm talking about over and over, and you don't really hear too much about that. And then when you decide that you want to do it yourself and don't get the proper help, every single little thing that goes wrong feels like the end of the world. You're like, why didn't this happen to everybody on Facebook? It's like, it did. And the last person you want to ask is Facebook. Now, that's not exactly true. There's some good help on Facebook, but more often than not, I can't remember what it was, but I saw something today. I can't remember. I wish I did. But somebody was asking for help and what could be wrong on a particular topic. And I read through the comments and I'm like, I'm not even going to comment here because these answers are so bad. This is already, I'm just not even going to get into this conversation. So what happens is when you ask questions on Facebook, you just get a lot of guesses. A lot of the people answering don't even have that particular car. And I'm not really throwing shade at anybody. They're trying to help. But by throwing out random answers that are certainly no way in any shape or form relevant does not help the person asking questions. So remember that. If you're answering a question on Facebook and you don't know for sure, at the very least say, man, I'm guessing here, but maybe it's this or maybe it's that. Then the other thing that we really have to talk about, and this is probably one of the more common things, it's gotten better as the Coyote's gotten newer and people have learned them better on tuning, is you could be chasing a fuel system problem and the problem is in the tune. So a real common issue is, and I've seen this happen a ton in the past, a ton. People changing injectors because the tune was not set up correctly. So in tuning, there's a million reasons that the car will lean itself out, and it's not because the injectors are too small, and it's not because there's a fuel system issue. It's because there's a tuning issue. One, sometimes it will use I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, so on a tuning issue, sometimes it uses enleanment for torque control, which is really, really bad on a boosted car. But that happened to me when I went to the Texas Mile, like in 2012 or whenever that was. We didn't have the Coyote tuning 100% worked out. And I made a pass down the entire mile. It was slow, but it didn't blow up at 1.0 lambda. And for those of you that don't know, 1.0 lambda is probably one of the most dangerous places to be when you're under boost, heavy boosts, and really going after it. You're better off being way lean because there's not enough fuel there to really cause damage, or obviously richer, which is where you want to be. And that was a 100% tuning issue. You could have looked at that log and been like, oh, we got a fuel system issue. We got this issue or that issue, but it wasn't. It was a tuning issue. And there's quite a few things that can cause that sort of tuning issue. One is, like I said, enleanment for torque control. You want to get rid of any enleanment for torque control. Let it pull spark. Let it close the throttle. Do not let it lean the car out. The other issue is not having the air model set up properly in the tune. And again, we're talking about you guys troubleshooting, but you have to realize that you can sit there for days and going through your entire fuel system, and it could be a tuning issue. Now, the top level tuners at this point, that's rarely an issue, but there's so many new tuners on Facebook every day. I just saw a post today where a guy had posted about bad dyno numbers. Some new tuner popped in and was like, oh, I can help you out. I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm near here. And like 3 or 4 guys were like, oh, I may need your help. And it's like, based on what? The guy just responded to a comment and said, I'm a tuner and you're going to use them? You don't even know who it is. It's crazy. Anyway, so tuning issues with fuel systems is certainly something to consider. And like I was ready to say, is not only is it used for enleanment, but you can also get into a situation where it fails the mass air meter. So if the air model is not correct, it's going to go, the mass air meter is not correct. So it's going to go it's going to go based off of the inferred speed density model, which oftentimes is not correct either. And then you're going to wind up with a real lean condition. And then the tuner, the reason I can tell you this is because most tuners have gone through this a long time ago, but now, most of the professionals know about this and have fixed all this. So, but back when we didn't know how it worked, oh no, let's add fuel. Let's add fuel. Man, no matter what I do, it's going lean. But there's no way that this shouldn't work. We've got fuel pressure. These injectors are big enough. Something's wrong, and that's how we figure out what the real problem is, by proper troubleshooting. In this case, we have to log. Well, what's the commanded fuel? Why all of a sudden is the airflow go way down? Because it's failing the mass air meter. It's going off the inferred speed density model, and it's wrong. So that's pretty much the fuel system stuff. I got a lot of comments rolling in here, so I'm going to check them real quick. We'll move on to some other issues like boost and vacuum leaks and all that here in just a second. Luke, what's up, Luke? Thank you. No issues. Yeah, that's when I thought I had an issue. I think everybody was just listening to me and no comments were coming in. Parker Performance outside their scope. Yeah, and the problem is I don't like to discourage anybody from working on something that might be slightly over their head, but you have to be resourceful enough to not let it stay over your head. A lot of people don't know my history, but I was not the young car guy, hot rodding since I can walk and all that. I got into cars a little later in life, in my 20s, like mid 20s. And I didn't know that much, but I was able to soak up insane amounts of information from other people around me. And when I'm working on something that I don't know, I make a huge effort to know it, to teach myself. One great resource that I find, although on this particular topic, it's probably a little tougher to find good information because videos on these sorts of topics, like hands-on videos, are a little bit more difficult. So hopefully me just talking about it helps some people. But I learn a lot on YouTube. I find somebody who's doing something that I want to do, and multiple people, and I watch some of their videos and I get to know how they do things. And, I taught myself CAD that way. I've taught myself, 3D printing, which is related to the CAD. I did all that together. I pretty much got zero instruction from anybody in person, but I taught myself a lot of that stuff just by watching YouTube videos and other sources of that type of thing. So, if it's important enough for you to work on your car, it should be important enough for you to learn how to work on your car the proper way. Parker Performance. If you thought it was expensive to do it right once, do it wrong and then have to do it the right way later and see how much money you saved. Exactly. That's really the biggest issue I see. We've had guys try to dump their projects on us at the shop. Like, man, I'm just done. I'm just going to pay you to do it. Nah, no, thank you. To a certain extent, we do take on problem vehicles like that, but the ones that are just so bad, we turn them away. We turned one away earlier this year. It showed up and it had wires laying, single wires just laying across the valve covers, going behind the motor. It's where the hell is that going? Why is it just sitting out on top of the motor? And I'm like, if that's any indication of what's going on here, then even if we charged this person every minute that we worked on it, we would own the car because there's no way they would want to pay that bill. If you don't feel qualified to do it yourself, but you want to do it yourself, the best thing I can say is find some local friends. That's how I got started in this. I started, I've always been mechanical with my, my father was super mechanical, could do anything with his hands. I concentrated more on computers, but I always had the ability, I did a lot of carpentry when I was younger and just working with tools. And, I did help my dad work on cars as far as fixing them, but he wasn't into performance. So the performance side of things I was new to. I found local guys in Cincinnati when I lived there, stangbangers.com, that whole crew. And, I think I had the very first set of billet camshafts for a 2-valve modular motor. This was in 2003. We're going to install them in my garage. What? No way. Well, yeah, but I had somebody there that knew what they were doing, and we pulled it off. And that car made some of the best power anybody had ever made at that time and all that. If I had tried to do that myself, I absolutely guarantee it would have failed, because there was one thing that happened during that is the chain slipped when we released the tensioners, and I heard something. But if I was by myself, I would have probably not thought too much about it. But it was Brandon Alsep, who's still in Cincinnati, and I said, did you hear that? What was that? Maybe we should check timing again. And guess what? The chain had slipped. So sometimes, even if you know what you're doing, it's best not to do it by yourself, because having an extra set of ears and eyes on the project does help. Nitrous and Biosupply says he put a low pressure fuel switch on his Nitrous S197, keeps the nitrous kit safe. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I have had a lot of problems with low pressure switches, because oftentimes on nitrous vehicles, you wind up with like little tiny drops in fuel pressure that will shut off the system. So even though it's not as safe, I don't usually run those. But if you get it to work right, it's certainly not a bad idea. Tez says, whenever I run into some issues, engine codes, etc., I shoot an email to Kobe through PBD Sport, and it's handled extremely quick and professional. Very thankful I went Team PBD. Thank you for being on board. I really appreciate that. Eric Carrion, one of my good tuning buddies. He's up in Georgia. He owns Injected Engineering. We're helping him with a F-150 right now. That's super badass. I can't wait to get that done. And I think we're going to do a lot more work together soon. He's actually putting one of the new TTR intakes on that truck. Desmond says smoke test. Yeah, smoke tests work pretty good. The big issue I see with smoke tests is it'll find big leaks. A lot of people are not using a pressurized smoking system, and oftentimes a lot of boost leaks are related to once a little pressure comes in. Like, for instance, you may have a silicone coupler that's somewhat sealed, and then under boost, it just opens up a little bit, and the smallest little leak is going to affect things, but it's hard to really know what's there. I just tuned, here's a good example. This is a great example. I was tuning a 2007 GT500 today on the dyno. Had a built motor, cams. I mean, it was a bad unit. I really liked it a lot. It makes me miss those cars. I don't see those as often. But did a 93 tune. It was making a little bit too much boost for 93, so we moved over to E85. Changed the pulley. It had a VMP Gen 3 on it. And when I went from the 93 tune to the E85 tune, all of a sudden, after the first pull, it was like really lean, right? This is actually a great example, because I've said this a million times, and I've used this example to other tuners, but I just caught myself doing it, not even thinking about it, and I just did it today, is get out of the car and go look under the hood if you have a problem. Don't just start changing the tune if it doesn't really make sense. And logically, this didn't make a whole lot of sense, but for some reason, I changed the tune. So the car's going lean. That's weird. Maybe we're hitting a different part of the mass air curve. Well, I could have went and looked at that, but I didn't. Let's start adding fuel. Oh, yeah, that was it. It's doing better. Add a little bit more fuel. Oh, yeah, it's doing even better. Well, then I go look at the dyno screen, and I want to see how much boost it's making on the new pulley. Well, it says the boost was 0. I'm like, well, God damn it, Bobby didn't put the boost sensor back on correctly when they were doing something under the hood. Well, guess what? Bobby did. I get out there, and the vacuum block had a fitting on the end of it with a vacuum cap on it, or it used to have a vacuum cap on it, and it shot it off. So now I'm kicking myself. I'm like, Jesus, I just spent half an hour, 45 minutes at least adding fuel to this tune, and now I bet you that was wrong. So I put the cap back on it, did another pull, and now it's 9-to-1 air-fuel ratio. So in this case, because it had the big cams and the way it was running, even though it had a large vacuum leak, I didn't really notice it driving it through the gears. So there's a lot of times that you can have vacuum leaks and air-related issues and hardly even know it. So, and that's what we're going to go over in just a second here. I want to look at a couple more comments. Oh my gosh. Steven saying, "Hey Ken, my son just received a 93 tune from you guys with positive results, 2020 GT 10R80. He also has an E85 tune. Can he download that at the racetrack RTD or will he need Wi-Fi?" If you're using, in a case like that, I think you need Wi-Fi either way because it needs the bootloader. Whenever you're flashing a newer vehicle with HP tuners, I believe TDN works the same way. Is you need Wi-Fi because it has to download what's called a bootloader, which is a file that gets loaded into the computer that kind of unlocks everything and lets it know how to flash. So it's always best to have Wi-Fi. Desmond says he tries to use the search feature before I ask for help. You know, and again, it's not a bad idea looking for help on Facebook, but don't ever take one answer. Now, usually when I'm searching for issues, whether it be car related or computer related or anything, I search for help online. I usually use the mentality of if the majority of people are all saying the same thing, there's probably a good chance that it's correct. Let's see what else we got here. Jason Miller, K2 BAP on pump gas with boostane for ProCharger P1X. Good for what PSI or horsepower? Don't have E85 here. I think I talked to you about this already. You're going to max out your horsepower before you max out the BAP, probably based on pump gas. You know, it depends on the application, but like Gen 3, 700, low 720 max on pump gas. Gen 2, maybe 10 or 20 horsepower more. And then Gen 1, even lower than that, just because of the engine itself. Engineering Explained has some great explainer videos on almost all things automotive. I do agree with that. That guy's great. I would like to do those sorts of videos, but they take a lot of time to prepare for. Like even tonight, I wanted to come up with like a bunch of real world troubleshooting things, and I didn't have time to do that. But then again, I also didn't want to throw anybody under the bus because, you know, all of our customers, you know, I don't want to make anybody feel bad. The Power and Speed podcasts are great. Also where I found your channel. That's awesome. Power and Speed podcasts. Was I on that or were they just talking? I'm not sure. I haven't been on that many podcasts. I'd like to be on them though. I think it would be fun. Closed loop fuel control. Yeah. What's up, Jason? Jason's one of my Cincinnati guys. Closed loop fuel control is good, but it also gets you into a point where it's a little bit of a Band-Aid or a crutch, I guess would be a better answer. There's a lot of people blowing up coyotes in the early days because they were relying too much on closed loop fuel control, where it's adding like 15 or 20%, and then boom, it comes out of closed loop, and boom. Bernard, hey Ken, I know I'm late, but thank you for everything that you did for me and how you handled it for me. Oh, well, Bernard's car is actually one of the reasons that I came up with this topic. So we'll talk about it really quickly in just a minute, and it is fuel system related. I don't have pictures or anything that I was going to use, and it was stuff done here, and it's the reason that we had the issue is unknown at this time, but we did find something. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Luke is asking about NACA Corvette. Nowadays, you can do the HP tuners, can unlock the PCM, so I wouldn't mess with any piggyback controller. I would just do the HP tuners deal. Kelly Aiken is trying to get me to tune Corvettes, CA Corvettes. He's got one, maybe someday. Bedard says the car is running crazy. Like I said, we'll get to that in just a second. Actually, let's talk about it right now. So Bernard has a GT500 that we built, and it's slowly built up over time, and it's pretty much a CX1100 now. Right here, see? Get these shirts on pbdyno.com. Probably not. We're probably out of all the shirts. I got to order some more. But anyway, we put a new fuel system in his car, and it wasn't very long, and he had a no start condition. Got the vehicle towed here, and it actually started when it got here. I believe I wasn't there, but I believe it started when it got here, but it was having issues. And the guys diagnosed that 2 of the fuel pumps were bad. Put power to it, boom. Okay, so that's goal number 1. You have a fuel system issue. Let's check the fuel pumps. Let's put 12 volt right to it. The pumps aren't turning. All right, we got 2 bad fuel pumps. Yes, that is 100% a fact. But why do we have 2 bad fuel pumps? Now, fuel pumps go bad, E85, yeah, blah, 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 but not in like a month or 2. This was like 2 months. So, I talked to the guys in the shop, and I said, look, it's good that we found it's the fuel pumps, but we really got to dig deep because we do a ton of fuel system installs, and we've never had this issue. The chance of you losing 2 pumps is very, very low. So long story short, went through the whole thing, had an FC3 controller. Sometimes there's issues with those if you don't have the set screw tight enough, and arcing and melting and all that. Took that apart, no problem. And then Adam finally found the plug in the fuel hat that plugged into the fuel pump had witness marks of heat, and almost like the plug was slightly melted. So we grabbed another fuel hat from that manufacturer and looked, and the plug was different. So now it's like, oh boy, this could be the smoking gun. It looks like they've changed the plug. Is it possible that the connection on the plug, just mechanical connection, is no good, and it was causing a huge amount of resistance and eventually heat, and the pumps failed? Or is there a materials issue where maybe that plug doesn't like E85, maybe the metal that's in the plug reacted with the E85 and caused an issue? Regardless, all we know is that 2 fuel pumps failed, and both those fuel pumps plugs looked bad, and everything else was 100% good, installed exactly how we always install it. So now we may have identified a possible issue with that plug. We don't know, but at the very least, I refused to just put 2 new fuel pumps in there until we found some reason. We don't know the ultimate reason, but we do know that it had an issue with the plug. So that's the story on Bernard's car. Devious says, thanks for the ProCharger tune. Max boost on a D1 with a 6.78 crank pulley on 91 plus booster. Man, you guys always hit me with these pulley questions. I'm sorry. I don't know the pulley sizes on D1s off the top of my head. And it also depends on what generation. You guys can ask whatever you want here. I just don't want you to think I don't care, I'm not paying attention. But those are getting to the point of being slightly too technical of a question for something like this, because I'd have to go look it up and do some math and ask you some more questions and things like that. But we can definitely help you out with that if you give us a call or shoot us an email. Luis says, I know you've asked this question before, but right now my car is in the process of being tuned by you guys. And let's say it's doing 600 to 700 horsepower. What gears would you recommend for the T56? Typically on T56 cars, 373s is a good choice probably for a T56. Some guys are running 410s. It somewhat depends on which gearing you're using, because there's a couple options there, I believe. Bernard says, I want everyone to know you and your crew really stand by your work, and y'all are in it for the long haul and not the quick buck. Thanks again, Ken. Yeah, on Bernard's car, I reached out to the manufacturer, and I didn't reach out to the manufacturer. One of my guys reached out to the manufacturer and got kind of a canned response and blah, 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 this and that. And, we recommend this, and, just kind of just bullshit, honestly. It's like we've never done this before. I've been installing these fuel systems for longer than I can remember, and we've never had these issues. Now all of a sudden you're using a different plug and there's an issue. And then I responded back to the owner, and once he heard from me and my exact perspective, things changed, although I have not heard from them again. And my guys come to me and say, well, what are we going to do? They didn't, didn't seem like they're gonna warranty those pumps. I'm like, what do you mean? What are we gonna do? Bernard paid us for a fuel system, and 2 months later, 2 pumps failed. We're gonna give him fuel pumps, and we're not gonna charge him. But hopefully, we can get some fuel pumps from these guys, or at least work with that company to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I'm not gonna charge a customer for new pumps and labor and all this crap when a part that we sold you failed. And that's why we don't install customer supplied parts. You bought the part from me, you had a problem with it, I'll take that up with the manufacturer, but we're going to take care of you. Now, that doesn't work for everything. If it's a race related part, like say a clutch or your transmission breaks, it's like, well, that's just how it goes. But when you're talking about a fuel pump or something that shouldn't fail that quickly, then we're going to take care of it every time. Turbo car seeing max boost at gate with and without controller. What could be causing this? That's a good question. We're going to go over boost issues, and that'll be one of them. I'll make sure I address that. Sorry, I'm just looking at a couple of these comments. I want to get caught up real quick, and then we'll go over the boost issues. Grant says, how are the F-150 turbo tunes going? Absolutely awesome. We've got the Hellion F-150 back in the shop that you saw in the video. We've got 2 or 3 more booked. I've tuned a couple. I mean, we tuned F-150s forever on 3 kits. I'm doing one for Shrek Motorsports down in Texas right now. But absolutely awesome. I mean, I love the Whipples, but the turbo tunes are money. Danielle Bishop needs more boost. Is that David? When you swap from a 93 tune to an E85 tune with an RTD, should you flash it to stock before switching? No, you don't need to do that. You can just switch over. He answered that for you. Oh, episode 38. I think you knew Rich, and they're both Jersey boys. Oh, okay. I'll have to check that out. My 4-system fuse that they provide melted. I installed an automotive circuit breaker. The automotive circuit breakers we use mostly, but they have their issues too. Sometimes they get hot and don't work. So, semi-truck technician, you tune Terminators? Yes, I do. I tune them constantly. I probably tune more Terminators than anybody on the planet, or I'm at least in the top 2 or 3. But we don't do them remotely because they're too difficult. Too many issues. But if you want to bring it here, we'll do it. I still do at least a few Cobras a month, I would say, on our dyno. All right. Let's talk about troubleshooting boost. Just like I had told you with the fuel system stuff, you have to go and figure the system out. Any troubleshooting, right? Any troubleshooting, you have to understand at least the basics of the system. Think of what you're dealing with like a flow chart, right? And if you don't know what a flow chart is, you're going to have trouble troubleshooting. But anyway, think of any system you're dealing with as a flow chart and follow your way back to the source of where that flow chart starts. And at some point, you most likely will find your issue. Okay. So we're talking about boost. I was going to talk about superchargers first, but who was it? Longstroke brought up, no matter what he did, he's seeing maximum boost. So let me read it again. I'll put it up there. Turbo car seeing max boost at gate with and without controller. What could be causing this? Well, there's 2 main things that could be causing that. Is one, you may have a vacuum line routed improperly, right? So let's say you have manifold pressure to the top of the gate, right? With no controller or anything. So that's going to keep the gate closed, right? It needs to go, if you're running just wastegate with no controller at all, you're going to put the manifold reference to the side of the gate, right? On the bottom side of the diaphragm. If you have it on the top of the gate, that's going to keep the gate closed, and boost is just going to run off, just keep going and going and going and going. So that's problem 1. The other problem, and that is common, when we get a turbo car in here that we didn't build, if I don't have to touch the vacuum lines and wastegates, that's a special day. I almost always have to mess with that shit. Always. Because people don't check with us beforehand, right? And let's say they're using TurboSmart. Well, TurboSmart gives you like 5 different ways you can route the vacuum lines. Unfortunately, the very first one they show really works well on small displacement imports, where you're putting the actual controller line to the side of the gate. We typically like the manifold reference to the side and then the boost controller on the top of the gate. But if you're troubleshooting a turbo car and you're getting excessive boost, the very first thing you should do is remove any boost controller at all. Then put manifold pressure to the side or bottom of the gate, so it's on the bottom side of the diaphragm. If you still have an issue, you almost definitely have a mechanical issue with your wastegate. You got to remember, in there, it's similar to a fuel pressure regulator. It's got a diaphragm in it, and that's attached to a valve, right? It's a totally different type of valve, but it's a valve. And if the problem is, especially depending on what brand gate you're talking about, this is a common problem with Chinese gates, is they'll work a little bit and then the valve gets hung up in the guide of the valve. So the valve either gets stuck open or closed. Obviously, stuck open is much safer for your vehicle than stuck closed. In your case, you may have a valve that's stuck closed, right? So, but beyond wastegates, let's talk about some other issues with boost when you're talking on turbo vehicles. So one issue I see a lot is, you have to remember, everything works off of, CO2 cars are a different story, and we'll talk about that if anybody wants to talk about CO2. But we're talking about a normal car that doesn't use CO2 on the boost controller. If you have a wastegate and it has a valve, so if you have boost going into the side, where are you getting that boost from? Okay, that's very, very important. Now, if you follow the directions of most turbo manufacturers, they're going to tell you to tap into the compressor housing, so right off the turbo, and that's what you're referencing for boost. I say no. Is that 100% from an engineering standpoint the right way to do it? Yes, because what that does is it keeps the turbocharger safer, okay? Because you're controlling boost based off the pressure the turbocharger is making, okay? But from a performance standpoint, what do we care about? We care about the boost that's getting into the manifold. Well, wouldn't that be the same as what the turbocharger is making? Rarely, very unlikely. And in some really shitty intercoolers, not even close. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're trying to run a wastegate of 10 PSI. You got a 10 PSI spring in there. You expect to make 10 PSI. You want to make 10 PSI. You have the boost line going from the compressor housing to the wastegate. Well, the turbo hits 10 PSI. 10 PSI is going into that vacuum line, opens the wastegate, and we're all good. The issue arises when you have 10 PSI at the compressor housing, but it's going through an inefficient intercooler, and it's got 3 PSI of pressure drop at higher airflow, which is at higher RPM. So now all of a sudden you're making 10 PSI, 10 PSI, and then at 5,000 RPM, boo, it starts going down, 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 down. And at red line, you're making 7 PSI. What's wrong? Nothing's technically wrong. You're just referencing at the turbo, you have 3 PSI of pressure drop at high airflow. So that 3 extra PSI is not getting into your manifold. Well, to fix that, instead of using the compressor housing, use manifold reference, or at least right before the turbo or right before the throttle body after the intercooler. And we're talking about, this doesn't apply to like intercooled intakes because it's a little harder to do that, but remote mount intercoolers. And now if you reference it off the manifolds, you're going to most likely get close to that 10 PSI the whole way. The reason turbo manufacturers tell you not to do, they don't tell you not to do that, but they just recommend right off the compressor housing is, let's say you have like a huge blockage in your intercooler. Well, the wastegate's never going to open. So now the wastegate's never going to open. You're going to overspeed your turbo and possibly blow it up. So it's safer for the turbo to reference off the turbo compressor housing, but for consistency and performance, it's not necessarily the case. So that's one of the biggest issues I see with turbocharge applications: wastegate issues or intercooler issues that have bad pressure drop and the reference line is not in the right spot. But there's lots of other things that can happen. You can have a blow-off valve that's cracked open and it's not closing properly. Maybe it's not seeing the proper vacuum. Maybe the spring in it's too stiff. That's not very common, but usually it could be a vacuum related issue. So, turbochargers are probably one of the most difficult things to troubleshoot those, especially on a twin turbo car, right? Because now you've got two wastegates and you might have two blow-off valves. You don't necessarily have two blow-off valves, but you might. So there's compounding problems, and there's more vacuum lines. You got T's, people using crappy T's, and by a turbo they're using a plastic T, and that gets hot and cracks. I mean, it's endless the amount of troubleshooting that you can do doing a turbo car. So when people say superchargers are simpler, they're right as far as those types of issues and troubleshooting. There's other issues you have with superchargers, like belt problems and things, belt slip and things like that. But the system is much less sensitive to that. So let's talk about troubleshooting a boost issue with a supercharger. Well, just like on a turbocharger, you've got a blow-off valve usually. So if you're having any blow-off valve issues, that's number one thing, right? If the blow-off valve is not closed, you're going to have an issue. But really, it's typically on a centrifugal type of supercharger. If you're not seeing the boost that you expect, more likely than not, you're having belt slip issues. The issue is most people are not logging boost on their vehicles. So now we've already talked about logging fuel pressure, which on the newer ones you can, on older ones you can't, but you can add that. Now we're talking about logging boost. So, maybe we need to make it more common where people have these systems set up. Like on my red car, I logged all of this stuff, plus way more than that, with my stock computer. What I had was an AIM AIM dash for my car that was also a data logger. So not only was I logging all the typical stuff that you would log with the stock computer, but I had multiple sensors logging boost and converter charge pressure for dump valve and fuel pressure and all those sorts of things, so I can review these things every single pass. Like, okay, it's lean. Fuel pressure good? Yeah. What was boost? And a lot of people are running vehicles and they can't log any of this stuff, So I guess I just encourage you guys to get anal and serious about this stuff if you're trying to go that fast. If you're trying to build a mid 9-second car, you probably don't have to mess with all that stuff. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to. But, now everybody's trying to go sevens and, eventually sevens are going to be slow and sixes are going to be what everybody's shooting for. And you can't just make all that progression without making your education level go way up, unless you're going to hire a full-time crew chief, which most likely you're not going to do in our sport, at least not with what we race. So, and then, you've got the turbo. Actually, we're on the superchargers. The one thing that I think is the most key point on if you're building a really serious supercharger vehicle, I think it's very, very important that you're logging boost. Now, we do a lot of GT 500s. They have map sensors, right? So they already are logging boost. I'm talking about a typical Mustang GT that doesn't have a map sensor. and you need to log boost. It's like, well, how would I do that? Well, we can help you with that. We don't really push that topic very much, but maybe we should. But for instance, with HP tuners or SCT, you can have analog inputs and then log those analog inputs through the expansion deal. I don't do it personally because I was using my AIM dash for all that, but you can do it and then it will all show up on your HP tuners log or your SCT log. SCT has an analog cable. HP tuners, I believe, is CAN based and then has like a breakout box. I probably need to get more familiar with it. Maybe we'll do a video on that if you guys want to see it. How to get extra data out of your combination. You know, there's all sorts of things that we can do there. But, you know, when you're, so let's say, okay, so we've identified a boost problem. Well, what exactly is causing the boost problem? You have to understand the system you're dealing with. So let's talk about Whipple because Whipples are so popular now. Well, we know we're low on boost. There's multiple ways that things that can cause that. Is your belt too long? Is your belt tensioner messed up? Is your bypass valve not closing correctly? You know, we on GT500s in particular, there's a decent issue on Whipple vehicles where we sometimes have to shim the bypass valve because the way the bypass valve works, for those of you guys who don't know what a bypass valve is, it's kind of like a blow-off valve on a centrifugal or a turbo where it's, you know, a twin screw blower is always making boost, even at idle, technically. So the bypass valve opens to relieve that boost and recycle it back to the inlet. Now, that works off on older vehicles. Usually the line to that sees boost and vacuum. So as soon as you hit it, it sees boost and it pushes it closed. Well, on a GT500, they don't do that, and it has to do, it's too technical to go into here, but it really only uses vacuum to open it, and then it has a spring to close it. Well, the problem we ran into on those vehicles, and, you know, we found this via troubleshooting, which was, let's say you're roll racing and you're at like 5,000 RPM, but not at watt. Well, you're making a bunch of vacuum. So now the bypass is open. Then you floor it. It can't overcome that vacuum. The spring couldn't overcome the vacuum to close the bypass valve. So what happens is when it closes, you're making 22 pounds of boost. And if it never closes, you're making 12 pounds of boost. And it's a, you know, 10, 15 mile an hour difference. And it's like, what the hell is wrong with my vehicle? And then you're like, oh shit, it's not seeing any boost. Maybe I got a belt problem. Maybe this. And it's like, no, it's your bypass valve. So you have to understand the entire system. And on a twin screw, it's not that difficult, right? You've got a pulley that turns it. If the pulley is turning the proper RPM, then it's almost definitely a bypass problem, or the blower itself is messed up. That doesn't usually happen. But if your bypass valve is working properly, then, you know, maybe you have either a belt that's too long, a belt that's slipping, a pulley that's not right, or a belt tensioner. We have belt tensioner issues fairly, not often, but it's not rare. So, you know, that's probably one of the harder things to find out. But usually like a belt tensioner, you can just see when the car's, like a lot of these problems are a little bit easier to troubleshoot on a dyno. So, you know, a lot of people that say you don't need a dyno, I don't agree. I love dynos. Name my company with the word dyno in it. It's a very useful tool, and that's one of the uses. You can sit there and somebody can, at a little bit of a distance, you don't want to get too close during a dyno pull, but they can watch the bypass valve. Is that bypass valve closing? Yes or no, right? You can just look at it. You can't do that on the street. Now, you know, if you want to get real tricky, you can throw a GoPro under the hood and videotape it, but that's a little difficult. But if you verify that, then, you know, if it's not the bypass, it's pretty much a belt issue, belt pulley combination issue. So it's a little different on like, well, I guess it's similar where you can run into a blow-off valve issues, let's say on a ProCharger or something, but that's very rare because those are still usually hooked up to boost reference. So that will usually get slammed shut without an issue. I'm going to go over a couple comments here real quick. Freedom Rider, do you recommend a check valve and a return system to keep it from having hard starts? You know, theoretically you should have one, but there's a lot of times we install it without it, and it doesn't seem to make a huge difference. Honestly, it's probably good practice. Although, anytime you add something to the system, you have something that can fail, right? So is the check valve flow enough when it's open? Is it going to stay open? Is it going to get stuck halfway closed? Now I got a problem I don't know about. So, sometimes adding too many checks and balances to your system causes just more room for failure. Nuxo says, how long do you expect factory cats to last on a 700 horsepower Gen 3 Coyote from a centrifugal? I know there's no solid answer, so best guess. That's going to depend pretty heavily on the tune and how you use the vehicle. If the tune is correct for cats, meaning they didn't turn off cat protection, then you should have a fairly long life. The big issue comes even in cat protection situations is if you're the type of person to go 60 to 150 and go, hey, that was a good race, let's do it again. And then you do 60 to 150 again and again and again. Almost no cat's going to live up to that. So you have to be a responsible owner. If you're not beating on it like nonstop and the tune's correct, the cat should last a really long time. We do, everything we do here, we install cats, all our GT500s with Whipples. They're making 1,200 horsepower with cats. And I can't say that we've had anybody have a complete failure on a catalytic converter on any of those combinations. We've had a couple where they stopped working quite as well and they would throw a light, but there was nothing physically wrong with them. They didn't grenade. They just stopped working as good. 2015 Mustang GT stock crank. Just wondering what max boost would be on 91 octane plus booster. Is 12 PSI too much? Probably not. Not with octane boost, but personally, running octane booster as a normal plan for your vehicle isn't a great plan for your vehicle. If that makes any sense. To me, octane booster is like, doing shots of Goldschlager. I'm sorry, I'm old. But, you do it once in a while and maybe you regret it after you do it for a little bit. And then a few weeks later, you do it again and you have a lot of fun and that kind of thing. If you're going to wake up every morning and drink Goldschlager, you're going to have a really shitty life. And if you put a can of octane booster in your gas tank every time you fill up, your car is not going to like you. Octane booster is not really good for your car at all. There's a lot of additives in there. We use it all the time. It's a means to an end, but it's not a good plan as a regular type of thing. What VP is recommended to substitute pump gas that has the same stoic, so no tuning changes are needed? Why would you want to do that? Oh, you mean like higher octane? I don't know. There's not a lot of people asking that question. I mean, when I'm using a race gas, I typically use MS-109, but stoic is a little bit lower on that. You could probably get away with it depending on what setup you have, running MS-109 on a 93 tune. But why would you want to do that anyway? Because you want the additional timing typically. Mr. Joe, what's up? Palm Beach Dyno. My engine is being installed now and will be there for PBD to tune when it's done. Awesome. That's Palm Beach Dyno. That just looks funny. What percentage of your customers know how to read a data log correctly? That's a very interesting topic because I've been involved in a lot of device development before Palm Beach Dyno and during Palm Beach Dyno, and that topic comes up a lot. Do we allow the customer to even see the data log, right? Like on TDN, I don't think you can with HP tuners. You just hit upload, and I don't think you can even get it off there if you wanted to. I don't know. I'm kind of split on this. I'm a big proponent of people educating themselves, but at the same time, it's sort of like me reading a blood test and talking to my doctor about it. I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. I know some of the numbers. I think the basics are good to learn. You certainly want to know how to look at, see what knock is and, So you want to be able to look at that. You want to be able to look at your air fuel ratio. You want to be able to look at your air charge temperatures, which is your or manifold charge temp, whatever you want to call it, the temperature of the air going into the engine, to be sure you don't have a pump issue, like if it's an air to water intercooler, things like that. So I'd say a very low percentage know how to read them well, 10 to 20%. A lot of people are scared to learn how to read them, or they just like the same way people are with doctors. It's like, I don't want to, you deal with it. You look at it. And that's good. But when you're at the track, if you're not doing like a remote trackside support, it's certainly in your best interest to know if your car is knocking on the first pass versus the fourth pass, right? Like, let's say you make 4 passes and then you get home and you send me 4 logs and it's like, holy crap, this thing, I can't believe it didn't blow up. If you educate yourself enough to look at knock, air fuel, air temperature, that's usually going to be enough. And, other things like your trans temp, if it's 10 speed, hey, what's my trans temp? I don't know if all the cars or any of the cars show you the exact temperature on dash or not. But on the log, you could definitely look at it. So, hey, shit, my transmission's hot. I'm going to let it sit a while longer. And, all those sorts of things, whether it's via a log or a gauge you install. I'm not a big fan of gauges at all. So, most of the time I'm just looking at a laptop or a log. It's definitely a smart move to learn how to read a log. And if you're a nitrous car, I tell people that all the time. If you're not a nitrous person, then you shouldn't run nitrous because there's a lot that can go wrong. Ranger 50 says, not enough boost, more dome. Yeah. Those reasons are why I typically don't suggest turbo systems to uneducated consumers. I try and keep those guys in a simple blower combo or give them the resources to learn about turbochargers. Yeah, I agree with that, depending on the combination and depending on the kit. Like the Hellion kit on the F-150, it's most of the kits are like this, but that truck in particular was a good example of you can truly just install that kit as it comes. As long as everything's installed correctly, the customer has to do absolutely nothing to enjoy that vehicle. And partly in that case, it's because of the turbo size. Even with a stock converter, it'll spool up. I mean, it's really a truly badass ride. In the past, with turbo cars, there's oftentimes an extra level of difficulty. You need to have a torque converter. You need to have a trans brake and all that shit. On that truck, we didn't do any of that stuff, and it still worked out great. And it worked out as just he daily drives that truck. He's a contractor, and he drives it to the job site. If he's a local job site, all the time. Craig Bill says, yes, I would be interested in what I need to log boost on my SCT. Yeah, we'll put together some info there. Basically, to simplify it, SCT has an analog cable that just plugs into the top of the device, and then it has like probably four inputs, and those are just 0 to 5 volt, right? Those read 0 to 5 volt. And then on boost, you'd have to get a boost sensor that has the proper range you want to measure. So let's say, you want to measure up to 50 PSI boost or 30 or whatever. Get a sensor that's scaled properly for that. You have to wire that into the input on the SCT. And then on the SCT side, you have to configure it to translate, so the boost sensor is putting out a 0 to 5 volt signal, and then the SCT is just reading the 0 to 5 volt signal. So ultimately, it's best to configure the logger to translate that value to boost, which you can do within the software, so it just reads the boost. We've had some people have issues with that, but as long as it says 2.5 volts and we know what sensor you're doing, we could always do the math after the fact if we really need to. What up, Walter? Man, I cannot wait to see that ProCharge car go down the track again. Although he's got a truck now too, so I think he's going to sell his Mustang. Parker, we just ran into an issue with a KB bypass valve. Turned out the clamp to the liquid cooled line was keeping the bypass from opening and closing. Rotated clamp. Yeah, I've had that issue on Kenny Bells before too. I don't know if it was exactly what you're saying, but the way that they do their bypass valve, it's kind of like a little bit remote mounted, and it's fairly easy for things to get in the way of the linkage. So Brandy knows what I'm talking about. Goldschlager, boy, we partied in the 90s like almost nobody else here. All right, nitrous and bisplas says fuel trims. Yep, I dialogued the SPL of my stereo on SET. Eric Rose, LOL, Goldschlager. I remember that poison. Yeah, I don't even. It wasn't even good, but you know, it had gold in it, so that's why we loved it. I guess I don't know. There's lots of things from the '90s that weren't all the best out there. So, all right, guys, we're wrapping up, getting close to our hour and a half. I know I did a lot of yapping there. Hopefully you guys can use this for some reference when you're trying to figure things out, or just maybe some inspiration on, you know, how to properly troubleshoot your car. The key point is, I don't care, you know, this right here, I don't even know what it is. It's a spray bottle for the whiteboard over there, right? Why isn't this coming out? I have never touched, you know, I've never made one of these. I don't know anything about it. But if you break it down, it's like, okay, you got to push down on this. Well, is that not moving? Well, that's probably problem one. All right, now it moves, but nothing comes out. Well, maybe the hole is clogged, right? So that same basic logic can be applied to cars, but it seems like most people are scared to take that step because of, like, they think they're going to mess something up. And, you know, that's not a bad thing to be scared of, but most people are smart enough and capable enough to troubleshoot most of what we're talking about, but they have to have the confidence and also be humble enough to be careful about it, right? The biggest issue are the people that just assume that they know what they're doing, right? And just do it. Joseph Thornton, hey, I partied hard in the 90s. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to be 50 this month, actually a couple weeks, 19 days. So I'm old enough to be a grandpa at this point. Common sense isn't so common these days, my brother. You're absolutely right. And that's, you know, it's a little disappointing. And I think the problem is, just like anything else, most of this stuff comes a little too easy nowadays. You know, I dynoed everybody takes things for granted. Where before you used to have to struggle to hit that magical 600 horsepower mark on any vehicle. It's like, oh my God, it makes 600 a wheel. That's insane. Nowadays, and no offense if your vehicle makes 600, that's still good. But if you're not making 800, 900, 1,000 horsepower anymore, it's hard to get most people's attention. Whereas that's still a badass setup. 800, 700 wheel on a street car is still a badass setup. So because all of those advancements came easily for the newest people in this hobby, they take things for granted. You know, they don't understand that things can break, or, you know, I get people all the time that get upset about things breaking. And I'm like, do you understand that you've over doubled the horsepower of your engine and you're worried that, like, you broke an axle? You're lucky that the crankshaft's still in it, you know? We're lucky that Ford builds us engines like a GT500 that can make 1,200 wheel horsepower stock engine, you know, or even Gen 3, 1,000 horsepower. My truck making 900 horsepower. I mean, to think that you know, even 10 or 15 years ago, you could take a stock F-150, add boost to it, and make 900 horsepower, and, like, nothing breaks for the most part. It's just absolutely insane. John says, I have low oil pressure after putting together a new build, Gen 2 heads with Gen 3 block, built to the hilt, checked everything except the heads. Oil pickup is good. Oil pump is good. One thing I've seen on builds where plugs get left out of the heads, so you would definitely want to check that. You can have like a a pipe plug in the front of the head, and it's just dumping all the pressure into the front cover. There's ones on the back of the head, but you would know it if one of those was left out because it would be pouring oil all over the floor. But if one of the front ones is left out, it just pours it into the front cover, into the oil pan, and you're not going to know anything's wrong. But I've seen that happen quite a few times. Parker says now we can do that with EcoBoost. Yeah, isn't that crazy? Joseph, I turned 49 in June. See, I got you. I knew I had you beat. They don't remember the Fox body days of praying to make 300 roll horsepower. It's funny that you bring up Fox bodies. I just said something to a friend of mine that stopped by. I got into this officially as a tuner like 2003. And when I got into it, Fox bodies were the old stuff, right? So in 2003, the newest Fox body was 10 years old. And then today, I just tuned a 2015 VMP car, and I thought about it, and I said, this car is almost as old as a Fox body was when I started, meaning I considered the Fox body old news, and then here is an S550 that is the new people just getting into this, looking at an S550 and going, that's the old, slow stuff. It's like, no, it's not. You know, I don't know. It makes me feel old, I guess. I don't know what that means. Hey, fuck him in. Oil galley plug in the front engine is good. Bearings seem good as there's no metal in the oil. Is there a way to check the head without removing them? Yeah, I don't know of a really good way to do that. I believe you could probably check pressure at the head in a couple spots, like on the back or maybe on the side. I can't remember. So you can check oil pressure there before you take everything apart to see if the head has, like, you know, if your problem is at the deck for some reason between the deck and the head, if you check the pressure right out of the head, that might tell you something there. My favorite car was the 90s Super Coupe. Those were pretty cool. I never really messed too much with those. Were you on Need to Speed back in the 2000s era? No, I was not, because I didn't live in Florida. I didn't. I went on Need to Speed when I first moved here, probably in like 2010. Our Need to Speed was stangbangers.com up in Cincinnati. John, thank you very much for the $10 tip. I really appreciate that. That's very nice of you. John F. says, Cometic gaskets. There could be an issue. Somebody like Josh probably would be able to help you better than me, honestly, right here. Did you inspect the O-ring inside the oil pump housing when reinstalling the pump housing to the pickup? Also, I think there could be some issues with oil pressure if you use the wrong head gaskets. We usually use stock head gaskets on most applications, but it still matters what year you use. On the 321 swaps, I'm not sure. Everybody's trying to help John here. That's very cool. Heavy Chevy says Need to Speed was the best. Yeah, you know, in general, forums just, I don't know. I guess everybody that gets old, you look back on the old stuff and go, so much better back then. And I don't know. At some point, that's probably true, and I think it might be the case here. A lot of the forums seem to just be a lot better community and people bonding and like felt like family, whether it's Need to Speed, Stang Bangers, or any of the other forums. You know, back in the day, Yellow Bullet was a huge national forum I was always on. And it felt like I knew people back then, where Facebook is just, you know, it is what it is. Parker Performance says they just had a torn O-ring on a Gen 2 F-150 that we caught by pure luck. Yeah. R.I.P. Vinny. Yeah. Vinny was our leader back in the Stang Bangers days, and why one of the reasons I'm doing Mustangs today, I would say. So, all right, guys, we're a little over today. If you guys have any more questions, I'll give you a minute to throw them in here. If not, I'm getting ready to sign off and head home and eat some dinner. I didn't even finish my Coca-Cola. It's probably warm now. Also, if you guys have any suggestions for topics, you know, I try to make the topic something that's on my mind, but sometimes that mind is a little cloudy. So I can always use some help coming up with different topics, things you guys want to hear. These types of things, I don't want to get into too technical. It's more, you know, broader, easy to understand type stuff. For those of you guys that want to see more in-depth type tech stuff, I'm willing to do that. But, you know, those might be more like videos, like how to log boost with your SCT or HP tuners device, things like that. I'm not going to do anything like that on a live feed, but I would still send in those types of suggestions because I can still make a normal video on that. Elizabeth says, miss the forums and miss Mustangs and Fast Forward magazine for sure. Hammer Time, what's up? Oh, Hammond, yeah. Thanks for doing such a great job on my 2023 F-150. It's funny that you responded, because when you did the Google review for us, you used Hammer Time also on your Google review, and I screenshotted that and put that in our company chat. And I said, man, I wish I would have known his name was Hammer Time when I made the video, because now that guy's 10 times cooler. I love that nickname. Parker Performance, great topic and live. Have a great night. Later, Josh. Any word on 24 F-150 availability for a Whipple on 24 F-150? Nope. I think that's going to happen. That's not going to be an issue. They're just, I think they're waiting on their truck. Whipple is, so they can bolt the Whipple on, get the tuning ready. I mean, you're probably months away, but it'll happen. John, check what Gen Coyote head gasket you used. Yeah, that is definitely an issue. I think that could be a possibility, just using the wrong head gasket. So, all right, guys, I'm going to sign off here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please share the channel with your friends. The more people we get in here, the more fun we have, the more questions we get. And obviously, you know, our normal videos, we'd like to see you guys like those videos as much as you can. Share it. It's really trying to grow the channel as big as I can. The bigger I grow it, the more I can do with it. And I need your help doing that. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this live feed, and we will see you on the next one.